What's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a little bit about the Brooklyn Nets. We're rapidly approaching trade deadline season, one that I don't expect to be super active. I mean, two of the bigger names on the market in OG and Siakam have already been dealt, and we've still got a couple weeks until the deadline itself. But I think one team that could be more active than people realize are the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, last season we saw them make two of the biggest trade deadline trades ever by dealing Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant pretty much out of nowhere. Kyrie made a trade request, and then like a day later he was dealt, and I believe it was right at midnight on the day of the trade deadline, Kevin Durant sent over to the Phoenix Suns, and they got a haul for those two guys. Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, 2 second-round picks, and a 2029 first-round pick for Kyrie, and for KD, they pick up Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, 4 first-round picks, a first-round pick swap, and 2 second-round picks, as well as Jay Crowder being rerouted over to the Milwaukee Bucks. It was a couple of blockbuster moves. They were necessary ones. It was clear that that duo wasn't going to work out. Neither one of them were happy there, and they got a massive return for both guys. Plus, they had a pretty good end to the season. Mikal Bridges, his first time as a number one option, thrived. He was a monster, putting up 26 points per game, leading a team that felt like they could potentially fall out of the playoffs after the deals to the 6th seed. And sure, they did get swept in the playoffs, but it felt like there was some promising stuff to build off of from last year. So coming into this season, it didn't feel like the Nets were going to be a solidified playoff team or anything like that, at least not in my opinion. I projected them right around an 8 to a 10-ish seed, maybe on the verge of missing the play-in. Really, it depended on a few different things. Some main swing factors that would decide whether they were a play-in team or a lottery squad. The first one was, could Mikal Bridges carry over his production? He was one of the top MIP candidates coming into this year for good reason. I mean, he became a 26 point per game scorer and pretty good efficiency for the Nets when he came over. So it felt like all he had to do was put up kind of similar numbers, and the award would most likely be his and probably earn him an all-star spot. Another big swing factor was, what was Ben Simmons going to look like? Last season, played a little bit, didn't play a lot due to injury. This season, felt like he could be in for a bounce back. I bought in heavily on the Ben Simmons bounce back train. I was rooting for him, and all he really had to do was get at least partially back to the guy we saw at times in Philly. He didn't have to become this consistent depoy level defender, incredible playmaker, like the guy that we saw make all-star games in Philly. He didn't have to be that kind of guy, but I just want to see him take some steps back towards that type of player. So hey, maybe in a season or two, he can find his way back to that form. So what Ben Simmons was going to look like was also a big swing factor. And also, how are they going to produce offensively? Because defensively, it seemed like they were going to be pretty stout. Ben Simmons, if he could bounce back. You've got Mikal Bridges, who's always been a pretty good defender. Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton as an anchor, as a fantastic defender. Royce O'Neal, like they've got some pretty solid defenders across the roster. They picked up Dennis Smith Jr. as well, who was an amazing point of attack defender for Charlotte last season. It felt like they built this team to be pretty stout defensively, but they didn't have a lot of fantastic offensive options. Cam Thomas seemed like a big swing factor for them as well, and just in terms of a singular player, how could he produce? And maybe a bigger role, because at times last season, especially after the deadline, when they gave Cam Thomas opportunities, he was amazing. So if he comes into this season as a starter, you give him the rock a lot of the time, how can he produce? Maybe he and Mikal Bridges form this really solid scoring tandem. You've got some role players, and you find a way to at least a decent offense, hold it down defensively, and boom, maybe you're a playoff team. So those are some of the big swing factors, and not many, if any of them, have really gone the Nets' way so far this season. Their year up to this point reached a rock bottom last night when they lost to the reeling Portland Trailblazers on an Anthony Simons game winner, falling to a record of 16-24. This is especially bad when you consider the fact that they were 13-10 at one point. So 3-14 in their last 17 games, and 2 of the wins in that stretch came against the Detroit Pistons in back-to-back games. So outside of that, they've only won one other time in the last 17, and that unfortunately was against my Oklahoma City Thunder in a game where they got ridiculously hot from 3, went up huge early, and they almost blew like a 30-point lead. Like the Thunder made it really close at the end, way closer than it should have been. The Nets do hold on, but even that win was a little bit shaky. And that's the only one they've gotten outside of playing the Pistons in their past 17. Over that stretch, they lost to the Wizards, Portland twice, and that's a team that's been getting smoked. They got blown up by the Bucks, the Nuggets a couple of times, the Knicks, the Jazz, the Warriors, the Pelicans. Most of the time, if they play a good team, it's not going to go well for them. And if they play a bad team, it's not a guaranteed win by any means. Losing to the Wizards is not a great look. They've got the 3rd worst record in the NBA over these past 17 games, only ahead of the Hornets and the Pistons, and they're behind the Wizards and the Spurs, who are both really bad teams so far. They've been right in the middle of the worst teams in the NBA over this 17-game stretch. And it's only going to get worse because they play the Lakers, Clippers, Knicks, Timberwolves, Rockets, Jazz, Suns, Sixers, Warriors, Mavs, Cavs, Spurs, and the Celtics twice heading into the All-Star break. The only game that feels very winnable for them in that stretch is against San Antonio, and they'll probably find a way to win one or two of the other ones because it's the NBA. You can beat anybody on any given night. But not a lot of those wins feel very attainable. There's a good chance they go into the All-Star break heavily below 500 for a team that, at the very least, wanted to try and make a play-in push this season. So let's talk about what's gone wrong for them. The big problem is that their defense, which was supposed to be their calling card, has been nowhere near as good as it was supposed to be. They're the 21st defense in the league and the 7th worst defense over this 17-game skid. A big part of that is that Mikal Bridges is having to take on this number one option offensive load, so his defense has fallen off a cliff. He's nowhere near the top 3 DPOY finisher he was at one point over there in Phoenix. Nick Claxton is doing his best to make up for mistakes, but he can't do everything. Dinwiddie and Cam Thomas really aren't giving you any resistance whatsoever on the defensive end. Dennis Smith Jr. is great defensively, but his offense is abysmal, so you can't play him super consistently as one of your better guard defenders. And also Ben Simmons, who I thought was going to be a big factor in this defense as a former near DPOY guy, has hardly played this season. He's played just 6 games and has been out for a while due to a nerve issue. We don't know when he's going to return. I don't believe he's got a timetable at this point. There's a good chance he doesn't play the rest of the season, and he did decent in his first 6 games, 6.5 points per game, nothing too crazy scoring wise, but grabbing you 10.8 boards per game and 6.7 assists, giving you some solid playmaking. His defense looked really solid. He's being physical, finishing plays or stopping offensive possessions for the other team, grabbing you boards. It wasn't insane, it wasn't the Ben Simmons back in Philly, but he was ramping up and it felt like he was in for a pretty solid season, but he just can't seem to stay on the court. And that's been the story for him over the past few years. And it's led to them crumbling on both sides because obviously he was supposed to be a big help defensively, giving you some size as, again, a former all-defensive player, but also offensively. His playmaking is big. His ability to get downhill and dish out to shooters was big for them in the first few games that he played. But since the beginning of the season, with the loss of Ben Simmons and also just some major three-point regression, the offense has completely fallen off a cliff to the point where it's also below average. They've got a bunch of decent options, but just nobody that's really elite. I love Mikal Bridges. I think he's an amazing player. He's not a number one option on a team really competing for anything. I think he could be a pretty solid 2 option or a fantastic 3 option. That's the optimal role for him, if you ask me, as that really solid 3 guy, but that's about it. I mean, he can be an all-star caliber player. I think he's got that potential in him, but I just don't think it's going to come in Brooklyn in this number one option role. He's putting up 21.4 points per game, 5.3 boards, and 3.7 assists, numbers that are down from the second half of last season when he got to Brooklyn, and he's shooting the lowest true shooting percentage of his career outside of his rookie season. He's just not built for this number one option game, and this role doesn't optimize him at all. Mikal Bridges is at his best when he's taking those spot-up threes, creating off the dribble. He's shown a lot of ability to shot create for himself with Brooklyn, but he shouldn't be doing that all the time, and you really don't want him to be one of your top 2 shot takers because a lot of the appeal in him is his high-level defense, but when he's trying to will this team offensively to wins an offense that struggles greatly, he's not going to be able to put in the usual effort on the defensive end to the point where he just hasn't been that great this season defensively. Another big blow to their offense is that Cam Thomas started off sizzling, putting up right around 27 points per game, but he's fallen drastically, just 20.2 points per game at this point, 2.5 boards and 2.2 assists, shooting 42.6% from the field and 34.7% from 3. It's not terrible. Like, those are perfectly fine numbers for a young scoring Cam Thomas trying to find his footing. And he's been in a bit of an inconsistent role. I haven't loved Jacques Vaughn's coaching this season. In fact, haven't been a fan whatsoever, and part of that is just continuously shifting Cam Thomas's role. I get he's trying to do stuff to find wins, but I don't know. I feel like he's mismanaged the way that Cam Thomas has been used. And I think Cam could be a great scorer one day, but for right now, he's just not consistent enough. The shot selection is terrible most nights. When it's falling, he looks like the most unstoppable scorer on the planet, but then some nights it looks like he's just destroying the offense single-handedly as just kind of a black hole on that end. Doesn't do a lot of playmaking. Really, if he's not scoring, he's not impacting the game a ton. Plus, the defense is really rough for him. Again, he's a young scorer. He's a smaller guard. I think eventually he'll find his footing and can be really good in this league. He's just not a guy right now that can carry an offense. He's taking the most shots per game for them. That's currently where they're at offensively. They've got good role players like Dorian Finney-Smith shooting 40% from deep, Cam Johnson shooting 39% from deep with 14.2 points per game, Royce O'Neal is shooting 37% from deep. Like, they've got some pretty solid role players. I think all the guys on this team could be really good in supporting roles. They just really don't have a number 1 or maybe even a true number 2 guy. Not a lot of consistent shot creation. Like, one of the top shot creators and playmakers on their roster, Spencer Dinwiddie, is shooting 38% from the field and 31% from deep. That's not a recipe for offensive success, at least nothing sustained. At one point, my brother and I were talking a bit about this team, and I think he put it well when he said that this is kind of an all-star team of role players, which yeah, like there's a lot of really solid talents on this roster. I think they could thrive in different roles, but they're all being used a bit more heavily than you would really like. It's just not a team with a true top guy. So that's led to them being kind of stuck in purgatory. And this was always going to be a transition year, but at the very least, I was hoping like Mikal Bridges would make an all-star game and continue to leap. Ben Simmons would maybe bounce back from his injuries in some type of way. Instead, they've just kind of had a disappointing season. Not that there's nothing to take away from this year. I think there have been some positives, but it's not been the kind of positives that I was hoping for. And to make matters worse, they don't even have their pick this year. It's owed over to Houston in the James Harden trade. So right now, they're currently slated to deliver the 8th overall pick straight to the Houston Rockets. So the question is, what's the move for them? Do they go ahead and just ride this thing out the rest of the season, see if they make the plan, maybe find their way into the playoffs just to ultimately get swept? Or do they go ahead and trade guys now, lead into the deadline, and see what you could get back for a lot of these quality role players, which to me sounds like the way better option. Right now, you've got guys like Lonnie Walker, who's having a fantastic season. He was a huge signing for them, and he's been fantastic as a scorer. He's expiring. See what you could get back for him. Same thing for Dennis Smith Jr. I'm sure some team out there would take a chance on a point of attack defender like him. Royce O'Neal also expiring. All guys I think you could get some type of draft capital back for. Nick Claxton is expiring. Do you commit to him long term? There's some rumors that they may not see him as a guy they want to pay a bunch of money. If you're not going to do that, trade him now. Maybe you could do like a sign and trade thing with restricted free agency, but I would just go ahead and get in front of it, trade him at the moment. I'm sure there's a billion teams out there that would love to trade for Nick Claxton and would probably offer you a first round pick, if maybe not more draft capital and a young player on top of that. I'd even consider trading Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges as well. I know they're two of the best players on this team, and I know Nets fans have a huge attachment to Mikal because of what he's become for them in his first year or so with the team. But you could get a really good haul for both of them. For Cam Johnson, you could probably get a first-round pick, some salary filler, maybe a young player. And from Mikal Bridges, there's a rumor that they were offered 4 first-round picks at one point from Mikal Bridges. Now, I hope that's not the case, because if they turn that down, that's insane to me. But if you can get anything close to that from Mikal Bridges, I'm taking that immediately. As long as they're not like the worst picks in the world, I'm super willing to accept like 3 first-round picks and some salary filler for Mikal Bridges. Get some more draft capital into this team. Mikal is great, but he's, 27, 28 years old at this point. He can't be your number one option. I'm sure the Nets want to keep him because they probably envision finding a way to lure a superstar over to Brooklyn, whether that's through free agency or a trade, and you've got Mikal as a supporting piece. I just don't really see it being a viable option for the Brooklyn Nets. They don't have a package that's going to match up with a lot of other teams. There aren't any big-time free agents becoming available this offseason. I would just get in front of it. I think at some point they're going to have to trade Mikal. Trade him right now while he still has value, even though his value is probably down from last season when you could have maybe gotten 4 first-round picks for him at the deadline, but even still, I would go ahead and trade him away. Consider trading everybody. You don't have to trade everyone, but at least trade the expiring guys, see what you could get back for like a Dorian Finney-Smith as well as a role player. You could get so much, like first-round picks, second-round picks, young players. Just pick a direction. Don't ride this thing out into the offseason when guys can leave in free agency, when guys are going to lose trade value. Make the moves now. And I'm sure some people are saying, well, they don't have their first-round pick. They have no incentive to tank. They're not going to have it anyways. And whether they like it or not, they're tanking at the moment. They've been really bad as of late. This isn't a team that's going to make the playoffs. They're going to give the Rockets a lottery pick anyways. Why does it really matter where it is? Do what's best for your team in the moment. And if you ask me, bring in draft capital to add to their war chest, maybe bring in young players to spice up this team. Maybe you get picks even in this upcoming draft. Maybe you get a lottery pick in 2024. Just find ways to help influx this team with young talent, work towards a new era. Pick a direction, because right now you're just kind of in basketball purgatory. You can still have Cam Thomas, maybe Claxton. Ben Simmons is probably not super tradable right now. You can still maybe bring him back at some point this season, next season, see what he can do. Maybe he can rehab some of his trade value, refine his all-star form. Who knows what can happen, but at the very least, you're going to have some young players. You've also got guys like Day'Ron Sharpe, for example, Derek Whitehead, Noah Clowney, who they got in the draft this year, who I think both have at least some potential. Who knows how much? Neither one of them have played very much for Brooklyn. So you can see what you have in them for the rest of the year. Just stop being in basketball purgatory is really kind of where I'm going with this whole video. I know they don't want to trade Mikal. I know they don't want to trade Cam Johnson, all these guys. It's not a team that's very good. Just go ahead and make the moves now before you regret it and let all their trade value kind of wither away. You let guys leave in free agency and you look back and think, wow, we really weren't going to do much in the first place. We should have just gone ahead and made those moves, especially because there's not like a bunch of big stars out there in the deadline. I think this is going to be a big role player trade deadline. Like teams are looking to add that final piece or two. The Nets have a lot of guys teams could benefit from. I'm sure they could get great return. So fingers crossed that's something they actually commit to and they don't just hang out in the middle. I appreciate y'all watching. I think that's all my thoughts I have on the Brooklyn Nets for right now. Let me know what your thoughts are. Should they trade Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, all these other guys? Do you think they should ride this thing out, find a way to get a superstar alongside these role players? Would love to know your opinions, especially if you're a Nets fan, because I haven't talked to too many Nets fans about this. Would love to know what you have to say, but for right now, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.